Good evening and welcome to New Foundation Unity. This is our second class in the series of Prophets of Ancient Israel. If you're having any difficulty viewing or hearing the broadcast, email our technology expert, Mark, at truthunity.net. I hope you have lots of questions and comments, and if you do, I will open up the phone lines at about 8 o'clock, and the number is 816-301-6304. 816-301-6304. I'll announce it also later at the time. And so as we begin our time together, I invite you to close your eyes, become still, and go into that inner chamber and close the door. Close the door on the outside world. And in the silence of your being is where the prophets had that revelation, the message that they were to impart. In the silence of your being is where you have that revelation that there is only God. One power, one presence, one life, one mind, and we are one with that one. We make that choice to reclaim power from all the false gods. There is not God and sickness, not God and lack. There is only God and infinite good. And so, for a few moments in the silence, let us rest in that awareness of the one, in silent communion in the silence. In the silence, I am open and receptive to the revelation of Spirit. And as we begin to return our attention to this time and this place, we give thanks that we have free and open access to the source of all good, infinite good that provides for our every need. And as we now begin to open our eyes and return more fully to the sensations of our physical bodies, we give thanks. We are grateful for that awareness of the truth that sets us free. And we give thanks in the name and through the power of the Christ that lives within us all. Amen. For those of you out in cyberspace there who missed last week, there is a link now available at truthunity.net for last week's lesson. And for those of you here, and for everyone, I'm going to do a brief review of what we covered. Take maybe 10 or 15 minutes before we move on to the next phase, which is Elisha. On the board here, you find the Hebrew word nabi. And nabi means, and I quote, one who is called. In other words, prophets are not born, they are called at a point in their development where they are able to discern the truth. And then also, once one becomes aware of that truth, the prophet proclaims that truth and is the personal representative of the one who sent. All right, in other words, you are sent by God to speak in the name of God the truth, and throughout all the books of the prophets, there are warnings and promises, and for the most part, it will be some variation of get back to the one power and one presence. In this class, I hope you can see the board. I tried to position it. The four things we want to be mindful of. First of all, the meaning of the name, because as I have said many times, the characters, at least in terms of their relevance to us, are not individual people, but it is a state of consciousness. We will be exploring, this is extremely important too, the historic context in which they appear. And we are still in what is called the divided kingdom in Israelite history. The importance of that is that, and you know what Jesus said about a house divided, a consciousness that is divided cannot stand. What happened was more than just a geographical division. And I am going to show you this map. But you see, if you can see it on the screen, just look on the screen. That's okay. Anyway, just, yeah, okay. All right. That represents the divided kingdom of Israel. That happened in 922 BCE, and I have drawn black lines around the northern portion, which was called Ephraim, but then changed its name to Israel. And this little piece down here is Judah. All right. Along with that geographical division came a breakdown in the monotheism of the religious thought. In a divided consciousness, there's God and something else. And so we ask ourselves the question, do I believe in health and sickness, depending on the outer condition? Do I believe in abundance and lack? Do I believe in peace and conflict? And so the whole point of the stories of Elijah and Elisha is to reclaim that power that we have given to all of our false gods, be it a condition in the outer, be it a person to whom we have given authority, be it a relationship that is more important to us than our relationship to God. There are a variety of ways that we can depart from that truth that we say we believe. And when we become aware of it, as Elijah did, he made the decision to reclaim the power that he had given away. Okay, now you all get metaphysically gold stars if you begin to interpret the chapter and the verse numbers. And if you're still having trouble with that, that's a reason to call in and ask a question. And then perhaps most important is to interpret the message in terms of its relevance to us. Okay. All right. So last week we studied Elisha, first of all, in terms of the stages of the journey. And so I will summarize just the lesson at each stage of the journey. He received the guidance that it was time for him to get rid of all these false beliefs that he had been holding. And it's like you would say to yourself, I need to take back power. And if you explore, I'm sure you can find places where you give more importance to the power of something other than God than you do to God. Okay, the summary lesson is that that phase is that you simply go within, withdraw your attention from those false beliefs. You withdraw attention. Okay? Then, after he's done that, he awaits further guidance, and that's when he goes to the widow and asks to be given some food and water. The widow represents love. Elijah represents wisdom, at least at a certain stage, he has an understanding of spiritual law, and he has enough discernment to help her see beyond the appearance of lack and to see beyond the appearance of death. The only lack that we ever have is a lack of connection to the source. If we were truly connected to the source and centered there, established there, we would never look at the outer and say, oh my God, the world is doomed. Oh my God, the stock market went down 100 points. How terrible. No, we don't need to do that, especially if we declare it. We make a statement. It's like making a covenant with yourself. And when you do that, you are less likely to break it. Okay, and so the message at that phase, the lesson is that love needs wisdom. The thinking and the feeling nature have to be integrated for spirit to flow through it. Okay, and so the widow, a love bereft of wisdom, I have only a little bit. What's the importance of having just a little bit? Does the amount matter? Because behind the smallest amount is infinite substance that can be blessed into more. And Elijah knows that. And he says, go use your oil, your little bit of oil in your bread, and do as you have said, but give some to me first. Give to God first. That opens up the circulation that allows more to come to you. All right. And after she's lost her son. He died. To her perception, he died. And so here's what Elijah does. He takes the son up to the upper room. And then calls on God to work through him. So it's an immature stage, but there is that sense of thinking and feeling becoming integrated. And she declares him to be a man of God. He then feels ready to return to confront Ahab. All right. On the way, he meets Obadiah. On our journey, we think we're ready, but Obadiah represents that we're still trying to keep a foot in both camps. We're still trying to believe in the truth of the one power, and yet we're still in the service of Ahab, or material, intellectual consciousness. Right? So at that stage, the old fears set in. He's about ready to confront Ahab, and he's beginning to feel some fear, and he needs the reassurance. And then the contest, that wonderful dramatic contest. And it's interesting to see that he asks Ahab to gather together all the people of Israel and all the Baal prophets, all 850 of them, for this contest. And you know the story of the contest. But what it is that we learn from this is that The altar representing the altar which is made of stone. The first thing Elijah does is repair the altar that had been torn down. An altar represents that firm place in consciousness with the 12 stones. All right. It represents the mineral element of life. The wood upon which the bull was placed was the vegetable element, and the bull for the sacrifice represented the animal. So it's like when he called upon Yahweh, the fire of God came down and consumed the whole thing. Okay? The other ones, the Baal prophets, they spent all morning up until midday limping around the altar, calling on Baal, and nothing happened. Now, Baal is a fertility god, but do we need a special god to bring rain? Do we need a special god to bring the crops? No, and that was the main philosophical issue with them. So during this reign of King Ahab, the two sins, the two very mortal sins that Israel was committing was the false gods. And here Ahab had converted half of Israel to Baal worship. He had left his own. So he was guilty of apostasy and idolatry. The other thing that happened was, as you saw from the map, is that the northern kingdom was cut off from Jerusalem. And so the sin of Jeroboam, who led the revolution, was to set up these alternative sanctuaries. So symbolic of abandoning the one power and one presence. Okay. So we learn the lesson here that in this contest part, that it takes, in human consciousness, it takes a lot of effort. We deplete our energy and get no result. But Elijah, all one has to do with the one power and one presence is to make contact with it, to center in that, and God works through you, and the result is everything you would ever need, require, desire, and it is completely without effort. Well, Elijah doesn't stop there. He then has another phase where he decides that he's got to kill all these prophets of Baal. And he does that. Whenever we try to use force in the development of consciousness, we get a reaction of equal force. And so the reaction sets in, and he has to flee for his life, because Jezebel's pursuing him. All right. Even there in the wilderness phase, and you can ask yourself, which phase am I in? Am I in that wilderness phase where I've tried to force things to happen? He still receives guidance, and he learns that he has more work to do. He goes on to Mount Horeb, where the important lesson is that he meets God face to face, and that God is not in the outer circumstances, not in the turmoil of the outer, but in the still small voice within. And there is where he receives his commission. He hears the guidance clearly of what he's supposed to do. And the first thing he does is to go anoint Elisha to be his successor. Elisha, whose name means God is salvation, the same as Elijah, has that very soft, loving, compassionate nature. And so Elijah goes from being like overzealous to being very loving and compassionate, and that's when the healing ministry begins. Elisha works with Elijah for several years, and during that time he has 3 trials. People keep saying, Elijah's going to go away. Don't stay with him. He's just going to leave. And he is able to resist. He answers the call. He stays steadfast, knowing that he's not going to leave Elijah. And when the time is right, Elijah says, it's time now for you to take up the mantle. And he says, only if I can have a double portion of your spirit. So I ask all of you at home, what do you think that means? And at 8 o'clock, anyone can call in and give me the answer. And if you know, you can answer here. But that's important. What is the double portion of Elijah's spirit? He doesn't feel ready to do his ministry without that. And Elijah's response to him, only if you see me taken up. In other words, Elijah's getting ready to ascend because he's done his work. And so we can see that Elisha has to have the discernment of that change in consciousness. He has to have the discernment. And what does Elijah have that Elisha needs? Is that zeal, that motivation. And Elisha does. He sees Elijah being taken up, the horses and the chariot in a whirlwind. And then he's gone. And there's Elisha with the mantle. And here begins a whole interesting series of healing stories. Whereas Elijah confronted all the things that were wrong, and Elisha is here blessing people. That's what Elijah learned from the still small voice, that it was better to bless and sanctify with love rather than to fight and struggle to make your point and be righteous. That's a lesson. So ask yourself, this is a journey we all take, by the way, and it just happens whenever the right time it is for it to happen. It was definitely a lesson that I learned. I was kind of the Elijah with the overzealous spirit, and I had to learn a better way. Not that I'm on the level of Elisha. So in case you are wondering what the double portion is, I hope you're all wondering. And it is both the ability, the discernment to say yes and the discernment to say no in terms of what serves spirit. Okay. The ministry starts, and we're now in 2 Kings. And the first one I would like to mention is found in the 3rd chapter. And now I'm not going to interpret number 3 for you, the number 3, but please have an answer available. Maybe I should make the phone calls, instead of waiting for
calling people.
Yeah. The story in chapter 3 is this: that the king of Israel, by this time Ahab has died, so he's no longer the king of Israel, and his son is ruling in his stead. Not quite as sinful as Ahab, but nonetheless, in the eyes of the Deuteronomistic editors, he did evil in the sight of the Lord. He calls Jehoshaphat the king of Judah, and Jehoshaphat's, he gets kind of a C+ from the Deuteronomistic. That's a really long word. Why don't we shorten that? And he says, hey, you know what? Let's get together and take Syria. And this is an answer, actually, to Jim's question, which came at the end. And actually, this is before I got my chronology mixed up here. But in answer to Jim's question, that was what his question was. Here was the king of Israel asking the king of Judah to take back some land from Syria. And the king Jehoshaphat said, I think we better ask a prophet to see if that's a wise idea. And the interesting thing is this: Ahab said, well, we do have prophets, but they'll only tell me what I want to hear. So he admitted to that, all right? And so the king of Judah said, don't you have any others? He said, well, yeah, there is this one, Micaiah, but he hates me and he never says anything good about me. So they agree that they'll take that one. And as he is sent, he is told that he better agree with Ahab or it's not a good thing for him. He'll be in big trouble. So he goes and he prophesies just as those kings that say what Ahab wants to hear, that it's all going to be well and good and Israel's going to triumph. And he says that, and Ahab says, wait a minute, you don't like me. I know that's not a true prophecy. And so then he tells the truth, which is that Israel is going to be badly, badly destroyed, and that the king of Israel is going to be destroyed. So that was the answer to Jim's question, and he's not here to hear the answer. But now I can move on to this first miracle of Elisha, which again, we have three kings. We have the new king of Israel, Ahab's son, and that king, and then there is still Jehoshaphat, okay, king of Judah, and Jehoshaphat comes to the son of the king of Israel and says, would you be willing, because when Ahab died, Moab decided that they didn't have to pay tribute anymore. And so Israel was lacking a lot of lambs and a lot of rams and a lot of wool that this king of Moab had been paying to him. So they agree that they're going to go after this king of Moab, and they walk around Moab, and they get the king of Moab to join in, and they walk around this valley 7 times, and there's no water. So they decide they can't do it without water. The king of Israel represents the will that is always a king, represents the faculty of will. Will that is connected to the intellect. The king of Judah is a spiritual will. The king of Edom, that they get to join in with them, represents the body. All right, so the will has to be spiritualized. And so the king of Judah says, we need to ask counsel of a prophet. And they call upon Elisha. Okay, so here's Elisha's first miracle. And this valley is all filled with trenches, but they have to dig the trenches when it's dry. So that's why they're not seeing any water. And so they are commanded to dig trenches. How, if it's raining outside, if you want rain, don't you prepare with an umbrella? So if you want water for your armies, you have to prepare by preparing a place for it. Water is spirit. All right? It's the living water of spirit. You have to prepare a place in consciousness for that to happen. So the trenches represent the faith faculty. You have to develop faith. If you can't see it, faith is the perceiving power of the mind, linked with the power to shape substance. If you can't perceive its presence, how can you work with it to form and shape what it is that you need? So Elisha says, activate the faith faculty, in essence, and water will be provided for you. Okay, so it is. But meanwhile, this king of Moab, with his big army, looks at these pools of water, and what does he see? He sees them as pools of blood, thinking that these others have destroyed themselves, and they march into what turns out to be a death trap, and they come in to get the spoils, and they are decimated. Okay, so Elisha provides water, provides the substance. The lesson is that God is not the supplier, but the substance itself that fills the need of the day. All right, it's a kind of a complicated story, but you have to see that each of the 3 kings represent a level of consciousness, a level of understanding. If you perceive through your intellect, if you perceive through the senses, the body, that you know because they see red. Spirit is not red. It is blood, lifeblood, but in any case. So you have to perceive the outer with a spiritual vision if you want to bring forth something that you perceive is lacking. Okay? So Elisha is beginning a ministry where he heals that sense of lack. Whether it is a lack of energy, a lack of prosperity, or a lack of health, it all represents a lack of connection to the one source from where all blessings come. And so the faculty of faith is really the foundation, and I think it's appropriate that that is the first of Elisha's miracles. All right, to heal. Elijah pointed out the separation, and he was in the face of these people because of their idolatry. And here Elisha comes to heal that sense of separation. Okay, next story. So make a note that that's in essence what it's about. For you at home, I hope that you read these miracles, starting with 2 Kings, that one, chapter 3. Chapter 4, we have a healing again. This is the widow, the story of the widow who calls upon Elisha because she has no money, and she is in such need that she is afraid of that she may have to sell her sons into slavery. Okay? What is Elisha's first question? What do you have in the house? What do you have? And it's one of these situations where I only have a little oil. I only have a little meal. All right? Almost the same as the widow in the Elijah story. But remember, wherever substance is, all of substance is behind it. So wherever you see a little bit, a penny, the whole infinite substance is there, right behind it, but you have to have the faith to see it. So Elisha says, here's what you do. You go and borrow vessels from your neighbors, and not too few. What are the vessels that are borrowed from the neighbors? Think of vessels as your ability to contain or to receive. These vessels have been depleted. These life centers in you have been depleted because of misuse. These faculties, we call them chakras, these 7 centers have been depleted, or the 12 divine faculties, they have been depleted through the accumulation of error beliefs, belief in lack, belief in limitation, belief in sickness, all those things, only so much, only so long, only this, only that. We've lost touch with the infinite source. And so she has been depleted, her energy and her hope has been depleted through her misuse of her faculty of faith. So she does that. She goes and borrows the vessels, and then she is instructed to pour out the oil that she has. Remember, she only has a little bit, invisibility. But what she does is she takes her two sons, this is Elisha's directive, take her two sons, go into the house, close the door. All right, so we know what closing the door means. It means that you go into that inner chamber in consciousness and you close out that appearance of lack. Why her two sons? What do they represent? There's only two sons, right? How about denial and affirmation? All right? When we go into the silence has built into it the ability to reclaim power, to deny power that has been given. It purifies. And it also has the power to affirm the presence of God and deny that there is any other. That's all contained with going into the silence and then your thinking nature has that discernment to be able to say yes to the presence of God and no to the appearance of lack. And so she began to pour the oil representing love, which is that sense of connection to the source. She kept filling these vessels until there were no more vessels. Her capacity to receive had been reached, but there was enough to pay her debts and save her son. Interesting story. And I think it would be worthwhile to see the differences between this widow and the widow in the Elijah story. We can talk more about that when we have a discussion at 8 o'clock. I'm counting on a discussion. All right, so big lesson, the infinite supply comes from within. All right, we need to experience that in order to truly invest faith in it. Next story it's right after, it's also in 2 Kings chapter 4. The Shunammite woman's son. We talked a little about that one last week. She also has a test of faith when the son that Elisha gave her as a gift for being his hostess. Whenever Elisha traveled through, the Shunammite woman would offer him a place, an upper room. And so the son, being the product, that is the son being the immature thinking nature between this Shunammite woman who had a very loving, giving nature, and this husband who was in that material, attached to that material realm. The son, the product of those two, was a child that could not cope with outer conditions. All right, the thinking nature was so weak, and a lack of spirit. What does the woman do? And this was her darkest hour. She runs to get Elisha. She thinks to go to the man of God. Even though her husband says, he'll be fine. He'll be fine. It's not the Sabbath. Let's wait for the new moon. All right. This is Shunem. That's a state of consciousness where there's not only rest in the inner realm, but there is a kind of inertia in the outer realm as well. Well, let's wait. He'll probably be all right. Right. And Elisha, she goes to Mount Carmel. That's the place where Elijah won the contest. This is God's garden. Infinite, infinite abundance of good. And at first, the servant says, I'll go. The intellect is the servant of spirit. But the servant couldn't do it because the intellect cannot heal by itself. And so Elisha has to go and be in that dead son's presence with the woman. And so when they get back, he shuts out everyone by himself. Shut out all human sympathy. Oh, poor boy, poor woman. That, no room for that. And he activates, he puts his mouth to the child's mouth, his eyes to the child's eyes, his hands to the child's hands. And activates, and then sneezes 7 times, activating all 3 levels of first the vision with the eyes, the mouth, the speaking, the power of the word, and the hands, the organs of action. So all 3 levels. And then the sneeze activates. He sneezes 7 times. That activates the 7 chakras. And the boy is fully resurrected. A miracle. Elijah is to Elisha as John the Baptist is to Jesus. All right. Elijah prepared the way. Elisha does the healing ministry. We're getting to almost, we've got 5 more minutes, so I'll tell you another miracle. Okay, so far we've had the water, the miracle of the water. We've had the miracle of the abundance for the widow, and we've had the miracle of resurrection. All right. And there's a whole bunch more, but next in order is the one in, I'll tell you the number here. It's the poisonous stew. And that's found in chapter 4. We're still in chapter 4, verse 37. And some poison has been put in the stew. And Elisha puts some meal in the stew that purifies it and makes it edible. Okay, that's one that we can also discuss because it's not immediately obvious if you do not have your metaphysical, if you're not looking through your metaphysical lens. I'll read you the exact words. And see what you think. All right. And Elisha came again to Gilgal when there was a famine in the land. Famine metaphysically means a lack of substance. Yes, famine, nothing to eat, nothing to appropriate, a lack of substance. And as the sons of the prophets were sitting before him, he said to his servant, "Set on the great pot and boil pottage." Okay? Boil pottage for the sons of the prophets. Okay? Pottage. Do you remember what Esau sold his birthright for? Okay. A stew. One of them went out into the field to gather herbs and found a wild vine and gathered from it his lap full of wild gourds and came in and cast them into the pot of pottage, not knowing what they were. Okay. And they poured out for the men to eat. But while they were eating of the pottage, they cried out, "O man of God, there is death in the pot." And they could not eat it. He said, "Then bring meal." And he threw it into the pot and said, "Pour out for the men that they may eat." And there was no harm in the pot. Okay, do we not take into consciousness all kinds of notions, all kinds of substances that, not that they will kill us, but somehow contaminate consciousness? If we appropriate, let's say, public opinion, we take in that, and it's really, you don't know if there's any truth in public opinion or not. There usually isn't. Or you take in some substance that, and the Jews were very big on unclean substances, right? Is that going to kill you? So how does Elisha purify? It's definitely something that contaminates the functioning of the whole mind-body system, but it's not fatal. Why? Because any negative thought, any false idea can be purified with the presence of meal, substance, pure substance. It's like the flour, it's like the meal of the widow. I only have so much. All right. Meal represents substance. We can appropriate, anything can be purified. There is nothing out here that can contaminate your spirit, but we can allow it. We can appropriate things that are damaging to our spiritual growth, but they won't kill us. So there you have another lesson about substance. Naaman's leprosy. There are so many here, and we could go on, and I will unless somebody calls, and the number is 816-301-6304. So I am now open to any comments or questions. And in many ways, Elisha's ministry is compared to that of Jesus. Because Jesus' name Yeshua, Joshua, who he came way before, then Elijah, Elisha, all the same, just different degrees of expression. So Jesus expressed more fully the healing consciousness than Elisha, but he did a hefty amount of miracles here. All right, well, I'll talk about Naaman if no one is going to call it.
I'm having trouble with the pottage.
Okay. Pottage, it's just something physical, some physical stuff.
Right, but then it is poisoned. Is
But
it
it's
a notion
it's
of
an
poison?
it's an
and then you have
it
a
wasn't
substance that
it wasn't
takes over?
it wasn't a conscious poisoning. All right, the guy was out gathering herbs. He didn't know what they were. Do we often take on opinions and belief systems and we have no idea of what they are? And he just kind of threw them in the pot. We are kind of a mixed bag of error beliefs, and so the sons of the prophet, who now sons of prophets, they're discerning, and they said, we can't eat this. This is death. All right. You remember Jesus said, one of the signs of his disciples is that they can eat poison. Well, not literally. That doesn't mean you go out and eat arsenic, but it's that you can appropriate, take in, ingest impure things, and nothing will contaminate your spirit. And so that's sons of prophets. They noticed that there was something bad, that it wasn't supportive of life, and so Elisha added, with his I am presence, he had access to pure substance. That's the meal, and all you have to do is, that's a way of blessing it. All right, you can bless anything into life. All right. Naaman the leper. Naaman the leper was a general in the Syrian army. A general, like a king, represents the faculty of will. Syria represents the intellect. So here we have the will attached to the intellect. Hi, Bob.
Hi, Eleanor. I have a question way back at the beginning. Could you move that board over to your left a little?
Oh, sure. How's that?
And
Tell me
I know
when.
you had the word I know you had the word prophet there, but you never got into what it says after prophet. You moved down to
I see.
to be mindful of the meaning of name, but you never really got into that part of the prophet. If you could just kind of touch that for a moment.
Yeah. Here's the Hebrew word up here, nabi, and that's prophet is one who, wait a second, I can't read it from this angle. Oh, okay, one who receives inspiration of spirit, understands spiritual law, and imparts it to others. So those are the three aspects of the prophet. Okay, they are able to receive inspiration of spirit, understand the spiritual law, and then impart it to others.
Okay.
So those are the three functions, and in individual in our consciousness, that capacity to receive a revelation from spirit may motivate us to impart that message to others.
And I think you pointed out, and I think it's a good point to remember, is that in a sense, in a real sense, we all of us are prophets, and we go through that receiving inspiration, understanding the spiritual, and imparting that to others, right?
Right. And we see in Elijah, in the beginning stages, that he had an understanding of spiritual law. But he was not yet capable of receiving the full revelation of spirit. That only happens at Mount Horeb. Okay. And he's all too willing to impart his notions to King Ahab, and he's, a zealous guy. And so, yes, we all have that capacity, but we are all at different levels of understanding. Sometimes we know intellectually the spiritual law, but unable to follow it or trust it to follow that. There's a lot of Go ahead.
And until we experience that, we really cannot understand it, right?
Absolutely. And that's what he learned up on the mountaintop, which happens to be the same mountain where the 10 Commandments were received by Moses. It takes a face-to-face experience of the presence and power of God in the silence of our own being for there truly to have the confidence, the faith, and the commitment to speak and act according to the truth. And that's definitely the message of Elijah. And Elisha takes up the mantle, and he completes the assignment that Elijah was given, which was to anoint Jehu and the other king of Israel. Jehoram, I think his name was. Anyway, but it takes Elisha to complete the mission. And so you can see from those stories that they're not different people. They're two states of consciousness. And you can see what happens with Elisha, the possibilities that come out from that experience of knowing your oneness in the silence.
Thank you. One thing that really is a light bulb that really struck, and it hadn't hit me before, but when you mentioned about when he tells the woman to take the small containers, that she says, but I have nothing in that. And what comes to mind is faith the size of a mustard seed, as small as it, and the substance is in the smallest. It doesn't matter the size of it. The substance is in it. Period.
That's right.
And, I think that was a good opening for me, and kind of caught my attention. I really like that.
Yeah. Yes, and that's true. I always think of how thrilled I am to find a penny on the sidewalk. And I think
right. That reminds me of Charles Fillmore finding the penny.
Exactly, and how
yeah. I don't remember the words, but
yeah.
But you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yes, I do know. Unity was built on a penny. And when you know that wherever God is, all of God is equally present at every point in space and time. So whether you see a penny on the ground, or whether you see $20, or whether you see $100 or more, it doesn't matter, that anything that you have can be blessed and magnified into more. And that
and my other
yeah, go ahead.
go on. My
And
other question is, when you were talking about the three kings of Israel, Israel, Judah, and Edom, the will, and Judah was the spiritual will, and Edom represented the body. And I guess I didn't catch, or I forget,
and
who then at that time was of Israel and of Judah.
yeah, that time it was the son of Ahab who was the king of Israel. All right, Israel being the northern part. And Jehoshaphat
Right.
was in Judah. Okay. And the king of Edom definitely represents the physical. He was the one who had to, he was the one who was the last one to commit to the project. And it was only because of Jehoshaphat that Elisha agreed to prophesy for them. All right, because Israel, he said, "What are you doing here, you king of Israel? You don't belong here." And he said, "I'm only here because of Jehoshaphat, because he asked me." And so that's when they receive the understanding that water will come if they prepare by digging the trenches to receive it. So it's all about the capacity to receive infinite substance. We have that capacity, but how much are we able to receive? Well, in this case, they were able to receive enough to defeat the army of the king of Moab. All right. How much was the widow capable of receiving? Well, enough to pay her debts and save her sons. Okay. And then with when we get to Naaman the leper, that is a really interesting story, because here again we have the will, the personal will, and that personal will has to be turned into a willingness to receive. Is he willing to receive guidance? Naaman is a leper, and a leper metaphysically means like totally separate from on all levels of life, separate from the source. And so he's totally outside, as they say in the New Testament, outside the city, not allowed to enter the premises.
Right.
And but he gets this idea from an Israelite maiden. All right, just the notion, that's just a little bit of spiritual perception that, maybe, just maybe, there is a healer in Israel. Okay. And so, and so you see the reaction of Naaman when he gets there, loaded down with gifts, and that sense of entitlement that comes with social status and money, and and his position as a general, like he can have special treatment because he is the general of Syria, captain of the army of Syria. And Elisha refuses to come out and see him face to face, and sends a message that says, go to the Jordan and wash 7 times. He is furious, at being asked to stoop so low as to go and wash in the Jordan. He says, we have rivers in Syria. I didn't need to come away here. And so what is necessary is a cleansing, a total denial of everything, total purification on all levels to align the will with spirit. It's actually his servant who represents the intellect who convinces him. He says, well, it's the same whether it's big or it's small. He's telling you what to do. Wouldn't hurt to accept it. And so sure enough he is, but that's what it takes to be totally willing to receive. It takes that cleansing in the Jordan, in the life current, 7 times, so that all of those life centers, those chakras, are purified. All these stories, just interesting, and there's so many more. And I don't know, maybe that's enough of stories, but these are found in chapters all the way from chapter 3 to chapter 13. So if you want to read 2 Kings, all of 2 Kings up to chapter 13, you would get a sense of how Elisha functioned and how that I am presence within you can heal, can bring abundance, can become manifest in the form that you need it.
It's interesting because all of these, and I think you pointed out earlier, that we see the similarity in the healing of Jesus in the New Testament. And I think you said Elijah represents or is representative of Jesus in the New Testament. Am I correct in saying
Yes,
that?
right. Elisha, and whereas Elijah
Right.
is like John the Baptist, the denial phase,
Right.
who wore a hair shirt and ate locusts and honey. Whereas Jesus represents the full expression of that I am presence.
This is kind of out of in left field, but what I'm thinking is when the writers of the New Testament were writing, and they were Jewish writers, so they had their source from these stories and implicating them and putting them into the teachings and miracles and healings of Jesus. I mean, if you look, you could see the comparative scriptures that are there, and they refer to aspects and healings and miracles that Jesus performed are similar to right here what we're studying now.
Exactly. Only to a lesser degree. That's the thing. And that's why I mentioned the meaning of the name. We all have that Christ presence, that I am presence, but we're at different degrees in terms of expressing it. And so,
Right.
Elisha does all the same things. Even one of them where, one that I haven't talked about before, but it's where somebody had lost something. He dropped his axe head into the water, and Elisha, and then it came to the surface, and so it's like the lost, that which is lost is now found. It's like the losing the lost, the sheep that gets lost.
Right.
So there are all these similarities. We could spend weeks talking about all the passages in the New Testament that correspond with Elisha. And that is the next stage, when Elisha becomes Yeshua, I guess you would say, becomes the Christ. But we not only have to enter the silence in order to receive, we have to actually become and incorporate and integrate that silence in all of our waking, dreaming, sleeping, in all of our time in the outer world.
Right.
So it's like we become the I am presence. We just don't get guidance from it. We don't just speak it out, but we actually become it, so that we teach by our example and through our radiance of that spirit. There is so much. And as we move on next week to Isaiah, it's like still the same thing. There's warnings and there's promises, and it kind of goes back and forth, but that's where we hear the promise of a Messiah. And in their day, this is 600-700 years before Jesus, but he's not talking about Jesus. He's talking about anyone who can do the work, the inner work of healing that sense of separation from the one power and one presence. And Jesus did, and so he was the first one to realize it.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thanks for calling in. That's great. I wish others would take the time to call in also. So have a good evening, and maybe I'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye. Let's see. Oh, do you have any?
Well, about the axe head, I don't know that it's important, but it kind of turns that whole substance thing. It doesn't turn on its head.
Okay.
But making a little all the talk we've been doing tonight of substance.
Okay.
Turning things around, you can get a little bit, and that makes as much as you need. I thought it was just really interesting that the axe head, which is heavy. You think of something that is substance.
And he loses it in the water, and then it floats up.
It's kind of a, it's to have these little things, little oil, little meal, that is as much as you want, and then have something that's really heavy. So it's not really these things.
This is like walking on the water. All right, it's that you can move across, you can transcend. The water, the whole stream of consciousness. We can get lost in that, but you have to look up the meaning of Gilgal, and there's more metaphysics there. But alas, it is time to close, and next week I would like to start on Isaiah, but perhaps just put in a word about Amos and Hosea, because they're short books, and because there's a again, a theme that has to do with these earlier prophets. And as you know, from the Bible, there are the former prophets, that's Elijah and Elisha, and all those found in Kings and in Samuel. They're prophets there too. And then there are the latter prophets, and those are the big ones, those big books of Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. And then there's the book of 12. And the book of 12 prophets, which includes Amos and Hosea, and there are 12. They're, like 3 pages. So I thought we haven't touched on other prophets of that early phase, and so I thought we would just have a look at Amos and Hosea. If you want to read it ahead of time, it won't take you long. And so let's close our eyes for just a moment and remember that there is only one source, one power, one presence, one mind. And we are aware of it or not, one with that one. If we feel separate, it is a human perception. All there is to heal is that perception of separation from the source from which all good comes. Amen. And if you would like to support New Foundation Unity, I invite you to take your love offering in your hand, and we bless that offering, remembering that the source is infinite and that in giving we receive. Jesus taught us that as we give, so we receive. And in receiving, we give. Fulfilling that universal law of separation. And as we send our gifts forth, we bless them with our offertory statement: divine love through me blesses and multiplies all the good I give and all the good I receive. And so I thank you very much for watching, for participating, and I encourage you to not be shy next week, and to call in, or you can email me at reveleanor@gmail.com or at newfoundationunity.org, and ask your questions or give me feedback. Thank you, and have a good evening.